My name's Jimmy Wallenberg. This is The Art of the Motorcycle here at the Holter Museum of Art in Helena, Montana. I put this together after seeing the Art of the Motorcycle exhibition that was done by the Guggenheim in Las Vegas as well as in New York. When it was in Vegas, it was one of the largest exhibitions that the Guggenheim ever had, which is pretty substantial considering the art that they have done over the years. But I just thought that I knew a lot of bike owners in Helena, and I thought this would be kind of cool to do at the Holter, and I approached them with it last year, about September actually, almost a year ago to the day, to do this, and the board discussed it, and we met, and they gave me the dates, and here we are. So I have, there's 23 vintage bikes here. They're all pre-74. The oldest is over here, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is 1926. And the oldest piece is from 1913, an original engine and fuel tank out of Indian motorcycle. I mean, when you look at these bikes, any of these, for example, here, we have, I mean, the lines, the engineering, just, they're so different than a bike of today. You know, this is from 1926. It's just beautiful. The suspension work on it, the engine itself, the fuel lines, they're art. I mean, the lines and everything on them. This bike here is a matchless. It's kind of a mismatch of different bikes, but it's a matchless engine. This fuel tank is handmade, hand-built by a gentleman here in Helena, Paul Gordon. It's all hand fabricated. It's pretty amazing work. This is a 1946 Velocette Mac, ridden. As you can see, I didn't want everything to be totally pristine concourse bikes. I wanted a variety, and I wanted the look of a ridden, patinaed bike, and this fits that perfectly. This bike is daily ridden quite often by the owner. He owns all these Velocettes. He has a Velocette collection. This is a 1935 Velocette with a 1920 all-original sidecar, which is pretty amazing, the detail in it. And he restored all these bikes himself. We just have a large variety. So this is a 1941 Indian Chief. I don't know if you can see it, but so this is a 1941 Indian Chief owned by a friend of mine out of Bozeman, Montana. And it is also ridden quite frequently. The unique thing with this bike, which is very interesting, is most bikes, the throttle is on your right, and clutch and brakes are, you know, your clutch handle, and this is solid. On the 41 Indians, the right hand is the spark advance to start the bike, to get it into position to start it. And the left is actually the throttle. And the reason being, back in that day, story goes, that due to military and police issue on these bikes, they could still operate the bike and shoot with their right hand. So it's pretty unique, side shift bike, foot clutch, right side shift. We also have a bunch of memorabilia. So the show is bikes, it's photographs. All the photographs are mine that I shot. I'm a freelance photographer. Then I gathered all this memorabilia from different collectors, a lot of it very local. Red Drennan, who was a local motorcycle dealer here years ago, very, very well known in the Helena area and surrounding area. He won this 85-mile cross-country race a couple of times. This is the winning trophy from that race right here that his wife lent us. He has since passed away. So we did a little bit of everything. This is an original Bell Star helmet, very rare, small face opening. This Triumph, this is a 1946 Triumph Speed Twin, 500 Speed Twin. This is the first motorcycle that Triumph produced after World War II. Their factory was bombed out during the war. They had to move the factory, retool it completely, and this is the bike that they came out with, which they say saved Triumph motorcycles. It was extremely popular, well received, and all the other manufacturers started coming out with 500 twins, single carburetors. Then, of course, we have over here the cutest bike in the show, obviously. We have a little Hiawatha Doodlebug. That's a 1958. No, excuse me, 1947. All restored. The owner had one as a kid and found one and restored it, and it's drawn a lot of attention. We have kind of an iconic line up here with a BSA 441 Victor, single, 500. Very, very high compression. These bikes were known to, if you miskicked them, they could throw you completely off the bike. So this is a 52 AJS, another British motorcycle. This is a 348 cc bike, 350. This is a Norton 750 Commando, one of the famous bikes Norton produced, and anyone that was riding back in the 60s and 70s and was 17, 18 years old, Norton 750 Commandos were a bike that they wanted, or a 750 Bonneville by Triumph were two of probably the most popular bikes. This is a Honda 350 four-cylinder over here that I built into a cafe race style bike. Very rare in that it's a 350 four-cylinder. They made billions of two-cylinder 350s, but not many four-cylinders. They were only produced for a couple of years. And this is a 1974. It's cafe style, race tank seat, clubman bars. Cafe style bikes were very big back in the late 50s into the early 60s in England. They would have a group of motorcycles. They were actually started by a church priest, and it was a group of kids, and they got together and they started building bikes like this, and they would race from cafe to cafe to cafe around London and in England. And it became very popular, and now it's a resurgence, big resurgence in cafe style bikes. Vintage helmet display, all kinds of different helmets from different eras. This is the oldest helmet. This is from the 1930s here, all the way to fairly new. This is a 1980s, early 90s world champion race helmet from a gentleman who was a GP rider. This helmet right here is signed by Evel Knievel to a good friend of mine who lives here in Helena, Glenn Middlestead. But the classic metal flakes and other styles of helmets, open face, closed face. Yeah. So we built this display rack for them out of copper pipe. So a friend of mine had this tank, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was perfect for the show. It's all kind of patinaed, scroll work welded to it. This is a piece of art as well when you look at it. So in here we have all kinds of stuff. I'll start right here. This is a 1949 Indian Scout flat track type bike. And And this bike is owned by a local gentleman here and his son. And this piece of art here is by George Sedlak. It's called the Indian Wrecking Crew. And it's the 1950 and 52 world champion racing against the 51 world champion. They were all factory riders for Indian motorcycles. And they're actually riding Indian Super Scouts, which were twins. But this is a very similar bike, single cylinder. So I wanted to have that bike in here, and it meets that there. Another flat track bike here. This is a BSA Hornet. Kind of all race prep, special framework, oil in the frame. This is a 1967 BSA. It was raced here and around the state locally. Of course, the Whizzer. Anyone that had motorcycles as a kid wanted a Whizzer. I mean, they were just, they're iconic. It's a bicycle frame, basically, with a motorcycle engine mounted inside the frame, and off you would go. This is a Greaves here. This is a Scrambler, a 250 Scrambler. This is a 1963. This is only one of 49 built, locally owned by Jim Black. Beautiful bike, just the lines, the suspension, front suspension especially. This is a piece of art right here. This gentleman's out of Missoula, Montana. This is a 1946 Indian Chief with a custom Indian paint job. He keeps this in his living room. He doesn't ride it, but it's beautiful. And the difference is, on the other Indian Chief, the shift was on the right. This is a left-hand shift, but the throttle is on the right here in 46. So it changed up. This bike here, this is an XR750 by Harley-Davidson, flat track bike, but this is the same bike that Evel Knievel used jumping later on when he jumped Caesar's Palace, and most of his iconic jumps were made on this bike. Earlier, he used the Triumph, and then he switched to these XR750s and made this a very famous motorcycle, and then it became very big in flat track racing. Extremely powerful, just geared incredibly. This is a custom built Harley here. And a friend of mine from Clancy actually builds Atomic Cycles. Just your basic iconic 70s chopper style bike. Which goes perfectly with this artwork here. These two pieces were loaned to me by David Ewell out of Golden, Colorado. He is the only licensed by Harley-Davidson to paint oils in the world. I met him in Vegas a couple years ago. We got to talking. I told him about the show I was going to try and do. And once I had it lined up, I contacted him again. We stayed in touch. And he sent me these two pieces of art to hang in the exhibition. They're absolutely just gorgeous. He was commissioned by Harley-Davidson of Europe to do a special piece called Chance Encounter. It's of a early 40s Harley-Davidson sitting in St. Peter's Square in front of the Basilica. And there's 4 Jesuit priests standing there, kind of looking at it. It's a great painting. Anyway, he personally presented it to the Pope, and that painting is hanging, the original is hanging in the Vatican, which is pretty amazing that there's an old Harley painting in the Vatican. So here are these pieces. These are the oldest pieces, 2 oldest pieces in the exhibition. This is a 1913 Indian original engine, 2-cylinder, and the fuel tank off of the same bike. The bike itself has disappeared, the frame and everything, but these two pieces still exist. So they're the oldest. And this is an original set of saddlebags off of 1940s Indian, not Harley. Those are Indian saddlebags there. This is a Kawasaki flat track bike, custom made, special frame, race frame, all tuned for flat track racing. It was raced by Jim Black. This is Jim's leathers. He's, again, local. I had his stuff over there earlier. Very, very famous flat track racer here in Montana in the Northwest. This little Suzuki, this is a road race bike. This is only a 125, but very, very fast. Interesting story in this bike was raced back in the 70s all over the western United States, mostly the West Coast. And then it was put away. It sat in a garage barn for several years, and a gentleman came across it, bought it, wanted to restore it back to original style, and unbelievably, all the original builders of this bike from 1970 were still alive. He contacted them. The original painter painted it. The original engine builder rebuilt the engine, tuned it. The suspension work was done by the original suspension folks, everything. Completely done again by the same people almost 40 years later, which is pretty amazing to have. Another gentleman here, this artwork here. I met Randy. This is Randy Owens. He's out of Maryland. I met him at the Daytona 24 Hours of Daytona road race, car race, and he had a bunch of artwork of cars. And I talked to him about and asked him if he did motorcycles, and he said yes. And again, we stayed in touch, and he sent me his original artwork here for the exhibition, which is pretty phenomenal to pick this artwork up from people around the country to give to me for this exhibition here in Helena. So we have this is a Yamaha 250 race bike. Actually raced in the Daytona 200-mile race in Daytona, which is a famous motorcycle race. This raced in the late 60s in the Daytona 200. It's been restored by Paul Gordon, same gentleman who hand-built the tank that we talked about earlier on the Matchless. Then, of course, we get to the Evil. Couldn't have an exhibition without having some Evil merchandise. So this bike was built by California Motorcycle Company. This is the only bike that is not pre-74 in the exhibition. But because it was an Evil bike, we wanted to have it. So when California Motorcycle Company built these, they only made 500 of them. They cut a deal with Evil that in order to use his logo, his name, his paint schemes on the bike, he got the first 15 bikes as payment. This is bike number 5, which came directly from Evil to a good friend of mine here in Helena. Glenn Middlestead owns this bike. He was very good friends with Evil, and Evil signed a bunch of stuff to him, including that helmet that we talked about earlier. But it's been a great exhibition. I think the Holter has been completely amazed that, and I'm amazed that we have motorcycles here in the Holter. I worked on this for about almost 8 months, seeing different collections from different folks. And that was one of the great things about doing this, is I met really some incredible people that I didn't know prior here in Helena, that I got to know through talking to one individual about their collection, and they'd say, oh, do you know so-and-so? And they have a great collection, and they'd introduce me to that individual, and we'd talk, and I'd pick a couple of their bikes, and it just snowballed into this. And I was able to pick the bikes I wanted, and everybody was very cooperative with bringing them in here, and we got them set up. So.